Welcome to the People Leaders Podcast, the audio resource for managers and business leaders creating high-performing teams. Join leadership and team development experts Jen and Michelle Turkelson each week as they explore both subjects from every angle. Through practical tips, valuable insights, and compelling interviews with leadership experts around the world, you'll learn how to bring out the best in your staff and how to give your best as a leader.
So here we are again. Hi, Shell.
Hey.
So we've got a wonderful conversation coming up on our podcast today, and I think that it's really appropriate considering what everyone is going through. And, you know, as you know, Michelle, you and I were on that mental health check or first aid health check. What was it?
Yeah, it's called mental first aid.
Mental first aid. And Michelle and I were on a workshop. So we were on the receiving end of the workshop, and it was really interesting to see another facilitator in action, as you know, we obviously do, but in this realm of mental first aid. And, you know, like 1 in 5 Australians are, you know, really challenged by their mental health. And I think that's a really wonderful reminder about if you're leading teams or leading people. That was the biggest takeaway for me, was that as opposed to going down the performance route straight up, let's just be mindful of their mental health. You know, what could be going on, you know, for them in their mental health before we go down that performance. So that was the big takeaway for me.
Yeah, isn't that interesting, Jen? Because I just got off a coaching call, and the biggest takeaway for one of the managers was seek first to understand and then to be understood. It was like, oh, that's gold.
Yeah, we love Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this conversation that we're having with Sophie this morning is such an important one, because Sophie, who we're going to bring on in a minute, is an addiction recovery coach, and she also has another a business as a brand strategist. So she straddles both sides, which I think is, you know, really interesting. She's grown up in Switzerland and the UK, and Sophie now lives in Australia and works with clients worldwide. So she obviously has that breadth. During her prior 10-year marketing career with world-class brands like Royal Albert Hall in London, Heston Blumenthal's restaurant group in the UK, she did hold senior level leadership roles and executive board positions. So after overcoming her own challenges with highly functioning addiction, Sophie uses her personal transformation experiences to help others encounter long-term rewarding personal growth and looks at life satisfaction on the other side of addiction. She is known for her experience that it's possible to attain and maintain a life of meaning, purpose and joy in recovery, which, you know, I think is such a wonderful aspiration. And Sophie owns a recovery coaching practice, and I love the title of her practice, and it is The Wolf You Feed, and the co-founder from Here On, which is a recovery coaching practice offering at-home rehab programs, and then these are specifically designed for executives. So welcome and come on in, Sophie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Oh, terrific. So, Sophie, we discovered that we live in the same suburb.
Yes.
How bizarre. And so once lockdown is over, we are definitely going to catch up for a face-to-face coffee.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Okay, so welcome, Sophie. So got a few questions for you, but, you know, the first one top of mind for me is, so can you step us through what is recovery coaching?
Yeah,
please?
For sure. So if we look at the meaning of recovery, first of all, the first meaning of the two is a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. And the second is the actional process of regaining possession or control of something lost or stolen. And these are both really relevant in recovery coaching. So recovery coaching is for people in addiction and can look very different for everyone. It's essentially a non-clinical, self-directed, strengths-based partnership between coach and client. And the main goal is achieving long-term recovery in addiction and also improved quality of life. It's based on proactive, forward-thinking, accountable change, often shaped around habit forming and goal setting and so on. It's actually also quite important to mention what it isn't. It's not a replacement for things like psychological support, trauma-specific support, medical support, or leadership coaching or anything like that. It's a real complementing coaching method for someone who really needs to look after their recovery first and foremost, because without that, everything really falls away.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask, Sophie, how did you get into it? Because in fact, I have been approached by some clients that I've worked with, challenged by this idea that, everybody, going out for drinks on Friday and I'm in recovery, and are there some different ways that we can incorporate, socialising? And I thought, oh my God, I hadn't even thought about that. So I'm really mindful of that now. But I digress. So how did you actually get into it?
I got into this through my own experiences. So I am in recovery of addiction myself, alcohol addiction. And it was a really, really hard journey. I was what is called a highly functioning addict, which actually is a little bit of a misconception, that term, because you don't really end up being highly functioning at all. But nevertheless, for many years, I was able to, keep up my lifestyle with this sort of in the shadows. And it was a really, really painful, difficult way of living. I went to rehab. And after that, I actually worked with a recovery coach. And I realized how effective it was for me, that whole methodology around forward thinking, being proactive, being someone who really thrived on being a high achiever in my career. It really worked well, the whole goal setting and habit forming sort of element to it. It was synergy really for me. And so I had the opportunity to actually co-coach while I was over in Indonesia a few years ago. And it really, it pressed a button, a sort of purpose button in my heart. And I really, really just realized this was something that I needed and wanted to do, both for my own recovery, because helping others and connection and all those sorts of things are so important for one's own recovery, but also because it could help other people as well. And knowing how painful life in addiction can be, having an opportunity to help people either avoid that or get through it and then maintain a better life on the other side was a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, you so articulated, the benefits of the coaching. Can you give us a little bit of a example of someone who is out of recovery, they're doing some coaching with you? What would be a typical example of a habit or something that they've started to incorporate just, slowly, that you have seen benefit over time?
So what can happen with people who start in recovery is often that journey can start in rehab. And rehab's a really, really great place to start because it's a very solid safe space to be. But what can happen after that is those walls are taken away and someone goes straight back into their life of high pressure, family issues that we all have, stresses and different issues that come up, however big or small. And so suddenly all those things start weakening everything that started in that rehab space. So as an example, if I work with someone who's just come out of rehab, we really look at what that real life looks like afterwards, and start working habits and goals into how that's going to suit them specifically in their real life again. So an example of that might be, someone that steps back into quite a high level leadership role. Suddenly they've got all these kind of big stresses and all of that kind of stuff. So we really peel back all the layers and just get back to the basics of what worked for them in rehab and then start building on that.
And so what would be an example of that? Like, is it physical activity? Is it meditation? Is it journaling? What are some of those things?
Yeah, all of the above, really. And that's how the things start off quite small, and that's the things that they can relate to back to rehab, because they're often the things that are, given as sort of support methods to use. They're then just brought into that more real sense in terms of how they can really apply that in their real time back at home, and make sure that it looks realistic to them. So if in rehab, for example, it looked realistic to journal for an hour, do exercise for an hour, and meditate for an hour in the morning, that's not going to be realistic in their new and real life. So we look at going, okay, well, what's the time you've got in the morning? It's 15 minutes. Okay, we'll work with 15 minutes. We'll do what we can in that 15 minutes. And then everything else sort of stems from that, and we grow from there.
How do you find, because I'm just imagining this is good for everybody, like, whether you're a leader or an employee or self-employed, what do your clients say to you in terms of the spillover effects of recovery coaching? Do they talk about that in terms of their leadership or? Absolutely,
yeah. I mentioned something earlier that, I sort of love this wording of, if recovery isn't in place, everything else falls away. And it's so true. And if recovery is in place, everything actually strengthens in the opposite way. So people really see a huge benefit in family life, relationships, partnerships, everything really, because what starts to grow is things like self-compassion, courage, confidence, and all those sorts of things. So when they're able to manage life as someone in recovery, everything else becomes a lot more manageable as well. And then they learn to start excelling again, and all of those sorts of things that they used to rely on alcohol or other addictive behaviours to sort of do.
And Sophie, sorry, Jan, and then you can ask your question, but in terms of, somebody engaging your services, how long, like, is there a typical engagement like cycle or period of time? How does that work?
It really varies. A sort of standard would be to start off with 10 weeks and do one session a week. But I've also had instances where if someone's, really on the edge of relapse, we'll have a session every day for a couple of weeks. It's really important, the accountability and the support if they're in that super wobbly stage. Other people who haven't got as extreme types of recovery journeys or addiction experiences actually fall into a category called grey area drinking, which is quite a sort of trendy thing in America, especially at the moment, where people don't really think they've got an addiction, and they certainly don't relate to the word addict or alcoholic or anything like that. But they do recognise that their habits and behaviours aren't serving them very well. So they're much more mild if we're looking at a sort of spectrum of addiction. And with someone like that, it might be a case of checking in every couple of weeks and, doing some accountability. But generally speaking, it will be that 10 weeks, once a week, and then maintenance after that.
So, Sophie, are you doing face-to-face and virtual, or what is your process at the moment?
Well, at the moment, everything's virtual because of the world that we're living in. But actually, it's in funny ways, it's sort of opened up business for me because it allows it to be worldwide. And this is a worldwide pandemic in terms of addiction. It's worldwide. It affects everyone. It's not something that used to, I think people used to think addiction was something that just happened on Skid Row. And it's not. It happens everywhere and for everyone. And it's not necessarily just because of a traumatic experience or just because of a bad childhood. Someone who's had the perfect childhood, perfect upbringing, great schooling, all of those things can still fall into addiction. So that's why online's working for me. And that's in the form of one-to-ones, and I'm slowly moving into some sort of group sessions now.
Right. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, because that's what I wanted to ask you also. is that we have found that as an experience as well. We've also found as an experience that people are quite comfortable in the Zoom, especially. So if we're doing group coaching, we do breakout rooms and we do coming to, but people are in their own physically safe surroundings. And we have found some incredible coaching experiences happen virtually, as opposed to years ago, people would not, we're only doing face-to-face, whereas now, once they are forced into experiencing it sometimes, they go, hey, okay, I actually are getting the benefit from that. And is that what you're finding as well?
Absolutely,
benefit?
yeah. And often the personalities of some people with addiction challenges, they can be a little bit, the extra things that come along with that are things like anxiety. So having that safety wall of the screen rather than in person works really well. In terms of groups, it works really well for example, I'm doing this afternoon a habit forming workshop, how people can find freedom through structure in recovery. So that sort of thing works really well in a group environment.
Yep.
There is a big place for the one-to-one though, given the topic and the subject matter. This is a lot of personal stuff. So some things work really well and some things are better one-to-one and some are better as a group.
Yeah, just like in coaching, all coaching. Yeah. And because I also read in your bio that you are ICF accredited as well. Yeah, and so are we. We think it is a good foundation for coaching for coaches to have some type of accreditation. It doesn't necessarily always make you a good coach, but it has some type of framework, I find.
Yeah, I think it's really important because, I think coaching has become a little bit of a loose term and, without wanting to sort of badmouth too much and some of the courses online, people suddenly can get a certification after doing a 2-hour course and there's not much, checking going on. So having something that's really thorough and accredited.
Yeah, it's rigorous, yeah.
Super important, both from a personal confidence in what I do perspective, but also for other people to know that they're working with someone that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, great. Now, Sophie, I'm putting my sort of managers, leaders cap on now, and I'm thinking, man, I might actually have people within my team that are in recovery. How could I, lessen the stigma associated with that, open up the environment that allows me as a leader to support somebody who might be in recovery? Could you give us some ideas on how or, we might approach that?
That's such a great question. I think that, as you mentioned, stigma is just, that's the elephant in the room, and it's painful because I think, to what you were mentioning earlier about the first aid course or day that you went to, this is really part of mental health. And I think if we can position it as that and allow people to see it in the perspective of mental health, it's it up as a much more realistic thing that could happen to any of us and more shareable in terms of if someone does relate to having that kind of challenge in their own life.
So, Sophie, if I'm listening to this now and I might think that I'm in the grey area or I know someone in the grey area, what would be the next most logical step that you could recommend?
I think if someone's in a grey area and they're not quite sure, the first point of checking is being really honest about the behaviour or the use. We can be quite crafty with an addiction, and that includes being crafty with ourselves. And so having raw honesty with the reality of the levels or, the impacts and all that kind of stuff can be a really, really good starting point. There's an addiction cycle model that's quite interesting. There's 5 sort of standard stages and then a 6th potential one. First one is pre-contemplation. That's where someone's not interested and doesn't believe there's an issue. The second one is contemplation, and that's where they're a little bit more open to motivational or non-judgmental information. The third one is planning. That's where they've decided actually or realised I need to do something about this. Fourth is action. That's where they really sort of get into the nitty-gritty of doing the work. And then the fifth is maintenance. That's where the recovery maintenance comes in. Now there's a sixth stage, and that's relapse. And that's if the maintenance falls away. So that's where the cycle can keep going. So if someone is in the pre-contemplation stage, that's where they're most open. So to what you were saying, Michelle, about how you could potentially sort of, broach this or make it an open subject. If people are in that stage and it's seen as something that's, okay to talk about, that's where someone's going to be most receptive to then getting to the next stage of planning. And the other thing, Jan, to what you were saying about if someone else is in that position, I think the most important the ways we can approach it is with compassion and non-judgment. Just being there for someone, not trying to change them, not trying to advise or force them into anything, is the best way of allowing them to come to the decision themselves that this is the best thing for them. Obviously, there can be a point at which someone has to be removed from a certain environment, but that's much later on in a very extreme case.
Lovely. And even, if I'm a manager and I'm listening to a podcast, this could be something that, you bring up in a team meeting, just something like, hey, this is what I've heard. This is the person who spoke about, if anyone and here is the link and the resource, just to kind of show and demonstrate that there is information out there and that there is no stigma. It's worthwhile kind of, having a conversation, even just sharing a resource. That's what you're doing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and there are so many resources. It's actually unbelievable. The world of addiction is very isolating. The world of recovery is connected. And it's everywhere. Podcasts, leaders. Even looking at the Hollywood actors, 90% of them are in recovery. It's quite unbelievable how rife it is. So making people aware that there are these different types of resources available is a great thing to do, for sure.
And then before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you about the wolf that you feed. So could you just share with our listeners, why you use that as your brand?
Yeah, sure. So it's based on an old parable. It's based on an old Cherokee who's teaching his grandson about life, and he says, "There's a fight going on inside me. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves, and one's evil. He's anger, envy, regret, greed, arrogance, and guilt, and so on. And the other one is a good one. He's joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity." And he says, the same fight is going on inside you and every other person too. And the grandson thinks about it for a minute and says, well, which wolf wins? And the old Cherokee says, the one you feed. So this whole coaching practice is based around feeding that good wolf and feeding it with all the things that fulfill us and make us feel whole and good and full of compassion and love, and all those lovely bits, and moving forward in life with all those things being fed and satiated.
And what a good question, a reflective question. Like, what wolf am I feeding right now? What wolf did I feed today? And what wolf do I want to really feed tomorrow? And that's, we often talk about setting that intention, but it's also, what am I feeding myself through my thoughts and actions?
Absolutely. Yeah. In terms of intention setting, that's such I love that, just thinking, okay, which wolf am I feeding today? Or which wolf am I feeding yesterday? It's such a lovely way of harnessing the whole concept behind it.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's a life lesson.
Yeah. So, Sophie, how can people reach out to you? And also, what are you working on or most excited about right now?
So, in the short term, I'm really excited about this workshop this afternoon. We've got a few people on there, and I love those environments, as I'm sure you both see why.
Yes.
In the longer term, from here on, which you mentioned earlier, Jan, is a new project, and that's really sort of, in its first stages at the moment. So I'm super excited about really, pushing that one and getting it off the ground. People can find me at thewolfyoufeed.com or on Instagram under the same name. Or they can find me on fromhereon.com.au, and there's heaps of information on there if anyone's interested or curious or just having a think about their own patterns and behaviours. There's lots on there.
Lovely. Well, yes, I'm following you right now.
Oh, me too. I'm just doing me too. That's exactly. I'm going to do it straight away. Right. I love it. Oh, my God, we are twins.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was a really reflective conversation and something that, I'm just going to, think about as well, because not only for myself, but also people around me right now who might be challenged. And, ultimately it's, be kind, be kind to yourself, be kind to each other. Be mindful of the thoughts you think and the words that you say. So thank you for sharing your purpose with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been amazing being on with you guys. So thanks.
Thanks, Soph.
You've been listening to the People Leaders Podcast with Michelle and Jan Turkelson. For show notes and other free resources, please visit us at peopleleaderspodcast.com. Do you know someone else who could benefit from cutting-edge leadership and management techniques? Please take a moment to share this and other episodes via your podcast app, email, or social media channels. Each share helps us fulfill our goals of reducing workplace stress and increasing job satisfaction for leaders, managers, and their teams worldwide. The People Leaders Podcast is brought to you by the Experts On Air Podcast Network.